the best shot I'll ever have.
And them?
They're looking for hope.
What about you?
Redemption.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where we are continuing our exploration of one of the greatest action films ever made, Mad Max's Fury Road. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, host, and voiceover artist here in San Diego, California. And looking forward to diving back onto the road that is the Fury Road of this particular film here, where we left off.
And we can't jump back on the road without the help of one of our favorite drivers, the producer of WTF with Marc Maron, Brendan McDonald. Welcome back to the Cine-Files.
Hey guys, the longer Max stayed out there in the wasteland, the more mad he got. So I'm hoping that this being our third time, I'll maintain some of my sanity by the time we're at the end.
As long as we have enough gasoline.
It doesn't help that you shaved your head and dyed your body white. So I don't know what we're going to do.
Just walk away.
We'll never walk away. So I think we're just going to jump right back into it. And where we just left off is just the tragic death of the Splendid. And we had that shot of Joe cradling her and screaming. And now we're back in the war rig with the wives, who are absolutely wrecked and sobbing because this was their leader. I think I think without Splendid, they would not have gone on this journey at all.
I'd agree with that. She was clearly pushing, for lack of a better term, driving the whole thing to happen along with Furiosa. And I wonder who came up with the idea first, right? Like, did Furiosa plan this with Splendid, or did Splendid plan this? Like, who is the one that made all of this happen? You have questions here after her death,
and they don't really show it in Furiosa in the film Furiosa. Like at the end, you do get the shots of her packing them into the war rig, but you don't know whose idea it was.
You're right.
It's funny. I hadn't thought about that question at all, but now that I'm thinking about it, my guess is that it all started with Splendid.
Yeah,
that it was her building a relationship with Furiosa, because I don't think Furiosa was easy to convince to go to try to hope for anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think that might've been taken some time to get to where we are.
Plus her being pregnant, that makes the impetus more available or more present and more recent. So she would be like, well, this would be the beginning, the conversations, I don't want to have my baby born under this person, under this rule. I want it born in this place, the green place, right? And I'm sure Furiosa probably talked about the green place in certain moments. So I wonder if Splendid is the one. I like to think that Splendid is the one that said, well, I want my baby to be born there. And that was the seed that went from there,
Well, and I think that relates specifically to what happens next, because Cheeto, one of the wives who we haven't talked about, goes running back towards Joe. And this is played by Courtney Eaton.
Yeah, another Australian actress and also model. She was Zaya next year after this film in Gods of Egypt. She is of Australian, English, and New Zealand descent with Maori ancestry there, and as well she was these were the basics. She was a series regular now recently in Yellow Jackets. So she's done a number of projects, but Yellow Jackets now has been the thing that's kind of solidified her as an actress. So if you guys watch that series, and I think the third season is about to come out, you know who Courtney Eaton is. Again, another young actress who has made her name.
And I think had Splendid not died, she wouldn't have done this thing.
Cheeto, don't be stupid! Stop! He'll forgive us! I know he will! There is no going back! We were his treasures! Cheeto! We were protected! He gave us the high life! What's wrong with that?
I think there is so much here about women who are in terrible situations in this moment,
Yeah. And I think it's a great commentary about when you're breaking away from a cult or a cult leader, there are people who, there's always that one person who's kind of half in, half out, but goes along with that group because he or she senses that's where they're supposed to go, but is not 100% sure. So having that be a situation where once it starts to fall apart, I got to run back to safety. I got to run back to this thing that I thought I was running away from that wasn't any good. It's the thing that I have safety in my life, so I must go get it. And so having them stop her, I thought was a great thing to add on to this so that there's much, as you said, Steve, much more levels going on with all these characters, with a minimum amount of dialogue, you get the idea of what's happening here and their little group, you know?
But it's a valid survival instinct too, status quo bias, right? Like, okay, well, we could just go back to how it was, and at least we were alive then. And the oil derrick people in the Road Warrior have the same argument, right? Like, there are a group of them that are like, he says we'll live if we just give him the oil. We should just give him the oil. I'd like to live.
He seems like a reasonable man.
The naked guy in the hockey mask? Totally.
Well, and I go to the moment where Furiosa said, everything out here hurts. Yeah. I mean, the fact is, and in no way am I saying that the lives of the wives were nice or anything like that. But the reality is they lived in the most pampered way possible while being the slaves and breeders of this horrible, evil man.
While they were young. And then after that, they're turned into those old ladies sitting on there just pumping out milk, you know. But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, what Brendan says is the frustrating thing I find sometimes, that people just always want to believe the worst, or believe the best of the worst people. And that's what keeps us from moving fully forward sometimes. And it's so frustrating.
And I think I'm so glad you said that, John, because it didn't occur to me quite this way. But anyone who's in a shitty situation and they have to get out of a shitty situation, it's probably going to get a hell of a lot shittier before you can get to the other side. And in a weird way, this whole movie is a metaphor for that. You're in a terrible, awful situation, and now you have to go through hell to get back to health, you know? And Furiosa comes out with that big rifle, and she's aiming through a scope past Cheeto to these two guys on the bike, and she fires and takes them both out.
Just to stop the temptation.
Yep.
Right, fully. Right, just went ahead and took them out.
We are not things. We are not things. I don't want to hear that again. They were her words. And now she's dead.
I think it's interesting that we're kind of talking about this right now, because I had an epiphany, and it relates to one of the next things that George Miller did on the film. And it also relates, Brendan, to your podcast, because I'm catching up on WTF, and I was listening to a director on the show, and I had the strangest thought, which is like, these two directors are nothing alike. And yet there is a weird connection between George Miller and Mike Leigh, who you just had on the show. Because, you know, and you go like, well, here's this guy doing these crazy action movies, and here's this other guy who's doing these improvisational, super character-based, very organic, very real films. Like, what could they possibly have in common? But the thing is, the experimental nature of the way George Miller approached this, which is having everybody developing their own characters, whether it's the war boys developing all of their rituals, the car guys building the cars with all those characters. And then this next thing that I want to talk about is so in the realm of giving artists chances to find themselves. Like, you wouldn't think there was a connection between the Mad Max film franchises and Eve Ensler, feminist author now known as V of the Vagina Monologues.
Ew.
But in fact, there is. So George was a huge admirer of Eve Ensler. As I said, she now goes by V, and loved the play The Vagina Monologues, but was even more impressed with all of the activism she did towards women's rights around the world. And so he calls her up in the midst of this shoot and says, hey, would you like to come to Namibia for a 7-day workshop with the wives? And she goes, sure. So she flies to Namibia, and she spends 7 days, 8 hours a day, working with the wives, talking to them about all of the things happening in the world of sex slaves and human trafficking and abuse of women, how sex can be used as the weapon, how women's reproductive rights are being controlled or their sexuality is being controlled all over the world. So we're in the midst of this action movie where these women playing the wives have very, very few lines. They're mostly sitting in the back of the war rig, and we take a break to have 7 days of exploration of these incredibly intense and difficult issues around women's rights. Now, just right there, that is the craziest thing for this action movie. I mean, it's like something you would do if you were doing, you know, a movie about the Holocaust or something like that you'd want to have these kind of workshops. You wouldn't think of it here, and yet that's what he does. The wives say that it was absolutely amazing experience. It really helped them understand their characters and their performances and the world that their characters are living in with the Immortan Joe. And it was so successful and so powerful to them that George said, hey, you know what? We need to bring all the men in. And so they brought all the war boys in and all the stuntmen for another couple of days of this workshop. So now we have a workshop about feminism and women's rights and human trafficking with all the stuntmen and that were just stopping the movie to do this. It is amazing. And I just have to contemplate that for a moment.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that Eve Ensler, V, she fully bought in to the film at this point. Like, it wasn't just a case where she was brought in as a consultant. She was like, I get this whole thing, and I understand my part in helping out with this, but she overall becomes a larger story consultant on the thing because of that.
What happened was, and you had mentioned before about the relationship between the War Boys and the wives, is the War Boys said, what we should do is we should have a ritual with the War Boys celebrating the lives of the wives, because they went, this must be how it is in the Citadel, is that everything is about the wives, the purity of the wives, all that. That's part of the mythology. So they created this ritual. They invited all the wives. They created this ritual, and they were chanting and dancing. And it sounds very much like, a Maori kind of ritual, very masculine, very physical, all worshiping the wives. And it sounded like, from the description I heard, is that it was very emotional, particularly for the wives, and not necessarily in a good way, like in a scary way, like because they felt what it must have felt like to be put in this position. And when I say, it's not that I'm saying it wasn't in a good way in terms of the film. I think it probably really was, but it wasn't comfortable for the wives to be put on this pedestal and worshipped in this way. It was really, sounds like it was really scary. What do you guys think of that idea for this film, for him to spend the movie's money and time to work on this issue when very little of that in terms of dialogue comes up on the screen? Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, at some point, it's in for a penny, in for a pound, right? Like, if he's already, and basically for 30 years, been developing the film with this kind of experimental building block process, why stop now, right? And it's, obviously developed the movie from a screenplay level, the way that we've talked about, where it was storyboards. And, bringing that back around to what Mike Leigh said on our show that the only reason he ever winds up putting these scripts onto physical pages is because that's how they have to be for award consideration. Like, you get the sense that if he had his druthers, he would just never operate with a working script so that they could do, okay, we're going to rearrange this scene here based on how this has developed so far or whatever. Like, that's part of the process of how he makes these films. And I think the same thing was going on here with Miller. By the time they got to the actual production process where the movie is getting ready to be made, I would think they probably needed this more, right? Like, this is the grounding of the movie at this point, is working together in collaboration with each other to build these characters. And it's why when we get to the end of this thing, it packs such a punch, because we've gotten to know these people, even the ones who are so briefly on the screen, as fully formed individuals.
It's why I always find this sort of it's why I frequently have problems with executives in Hollywood, because it's hard to explain. There's not a 1-to-1 ratio between what you put into the movie and what you get out of the movie. Like, there are things that you do, and it's like, I cannot justify that on a budget list. I cannot say exactly what this is going to affect in the film, but you have an emotional instinct as a filmmaker that this is going to help get us somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes all these films, like you said, like we've said many times on the Cine-Files, that it is such an utter crapshoot. No matter what you plan for, you just never know what's available and what you can do and what you can get away with. And sometimes, because there's another film where he invites Eve onto the film and the film is not good, it doesn't quite accomplish anything, and the actors aren't receptive to it, or some of the male actors are like, that's stupid, I don't want to be part of it. So it was a great combination of factors that allowed this to work in this particular situation, and it's all unseen. Like, we don't see the results of we don't connect the results of the process with the process, right? Where there was no videos that came out ahead of time showing Eve talking to the guys, so that when we saw it on screen, we're like, oh, that's so cool. It connected up the way they made it work. We're just seeing the end results, and we have this maybe subconscious feeling or real deep in ourselves, this feeling that, okay, there's something more that happened in these interactions and these connections. There's something more that's built in, and we're able to dive in and buy into the connections they have with each other because of the work they did off screen. So we only get to revel in the results, but it's an interesting process that he went through, and I'm glad it worked. And I'm glad everyone seemed to be receptive to it, because I said not a lot of dudes probably would be receptive to that, especially stunt muscle lifting guys sometimes don't necessarily open the door to this kind of stuff. So it speaks volumes that these guys did,
It's funny. We just did, our last film was Sideways, and I just suddenly went, oh, when you're making wine, you're going to do a whole bunch of things and take really good care.
Right.
And you're going to put it in a barrel, and then years or decades later, you're going to open it up and see what effect all the work you had on the final product. And there isn't really a way to know when you start what it's going to taste like when you finish. And that is so true of making a movie.
Yeah.
So we fade to black. And again, we have these rests in the film, and we come out of the black to this ridiculously cool shot of all of Joe's fleet of cars coming towards camera. And then the camera goes down and the cars go over us. It's just super, super cool.
Yeah.
And now we're in the cab, and Furiosa wants to go back and make some repairs. And Capable says,
I'll go.
No, I want you to stay together.
I can do it.
and I love the name Capable because that's how she really seems. And this is Riley Keough.
For those of you who don't know, Riley Keough is the eldest grandchild of Elvis Presley and Priscilla Presley. She is the daughter of Lisa Marie Presley, sadly, who passed away recently. She started modeling as a teenager. She did work for Dolce and Gabbana. She has appeared on the cover of Vogue with her mom and her grandmother, with her mom and her grandmother. And she began her acting career in 2010 when she played Mary Curry in the Runaways film with Elle Fanning. I think Kristen Stewart was in this as well. She was in The Good Doctor, Jack and Diane, Steven Soderbergh's Magic Mike. Recently, you've seen her in the Under the Bridge series, which is on Hulu. Daisy Jones and the Six, which got a lot of good reviews on that one. And Logan Lucky, one of my quietly favorite Soderbergh films of the last few years. But Riley Keough is becoming a very strong, powerful voice, not only in the Elvis side of things, but also as an actress herself. I think she now has control of Graceland after the passing of Lisa Marie, after having a court battle with her grandmother over control. So a fascinating amount of power she's now accrued over the last 10 years since this movie.
And we see her go back to the back of the war rig. She's got those big binoculars. We also see that there's a bad guy crawling underneath the war rig. Yeah. And then she hears this whimper and she turns around and there is Nux sort of cowering almost in the fetal position in the corner.
He saw it. He saw it all. My own blood bag driving the rig that killed her.
And he starts banging his head against the war rig.
Stop doing that.
I love this scene.
He's the cult member who is ashamed in this moment of what went down. And it's kind of deconstructed his reality completely. Like, this is what I believe. This is what I was sent for or prepared for. And now I was shamed in the process by my blood bag who took the car and in front of my cult leader did better than I did. And so he's in this place where he's much more vulnerable, right? If this was a Slim or the other guy, I don't think you have the same kind of reaction. But this kid is clearly a sensitive kid. He was conditioned or trained to believe this stuff. So in this moment, he is much more vulnerable than you would normally anticipate one of these war boys to be, which allows Capable in him to have this connection. Like, she's the one that stops him from banging his head on the ground or in the cab, and then have this conversation with her about what all this was about. You know, she isn't yelling at him or wanting to hurt him. She's wanting to understand and speak to his vulnerability, which I think is great.
It's a nifty trick, too, to pull off this kind of vulnerable empathy toward a character with such a limited shelf life, frankly.
Yeah,
know that it's established from the beginning of the movie that all of these irradiated war boys are going to die soon. Yeah. He's dying at the beginning of the movie, and it's not like a tragic decline. This is not one out of 100 people who has cancer. This is all of them. It would be like trying to wrest some type of very deep emotional core out of like one of the clones in Attack of the Clones, right? And yet all the building of what this community, this system means to not just him, but all the war boys, which I said the last time, pays off in that scene with Immortan Joe, where you're getting all this lingo of the Valhalla talk and, witness me and that, and it actually lands with you. But here's where you see, like, oh man, I would feel this way too. Like I can apply this to my own life. The time where I thought I did everything right and it just screwed up. And now all I want to do is crawl into a hole.
Yeah.
I was awaited in Valhalla. They were calling my name. I should be walking with the immortal, feasting with the heroes of all time.
It's the deconstruction of the mythology that's like, this is the first crack in it, because he is supposed, he has a destiny. And I think we all walk around, and particularly I think young men walk around with this idea, I have a special destiny to do the thing. I still have those thoughts in my head, like coming up against my reality, just like, no, but I'm Steve. I'm supposed to be able to do these things. No, there's no special destiny waiting for anybody. And Capable is so lovely in the scene because she lies down next to him.
I'd say it was your manifest destiny not to.
I think this is more compassion than anyone has ever showed Nux.
I thought I was being spared for something great. I got to drive a pursuit vehicle. For a while, even Larry and Barry stopped chewing on my windpipe.
And I think us, like Capable, are going, who the fuck are Larry and Barry? And he gestures up to the two little growths on his shoulders who now, for the first time you notice, have little tiny faces on them.
And he calls them his mates.
His mates who are literally killing him.
Yeah.
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 Have you guys seen, by the way, How to Get Ahead in Advertising?
Yeah. Richard E. Grant.
Yeah.
I can't not think about that in the scene because it's all about a giant boil that has a face and comes to life.
I remember that being one of those whacked out things I watched like in the early 90s or whatever.
Yeah. I haven't seen it in forever, but I remember loving that movie.
It was like a version. What's the one with the monster with two heads, the one with Ray Milland? It's kind of a version of that almost.
I think, isn't that what it's called? The Thing with Two Heads?
Yeah, the Thing with Two
Rosie
Heads.
Greer.
Rosie Greer, that's right.
Dude, that's a deep cut. I'm impressed.
But I love this scene because this is almost correlative, right? And if I can venture to make a comparison here, we all have this thing where we think we are destined to do something, right? And she's telling him that, no, you might have another destiny, right? Some of us have to make those adjustments. Certainly, I came out to LA to be an actor and I stumbled into this podcasting thing in 2015 and it has been my life and I've enjoyed myself much more than I ever did doing any acting in Los Angeles. And so you just never know, but you've got to be open to it. And if I can venture to say this about Marc Maron, right? He came out as a stand-up. He was doing stand-up. This podcasting thing opened to him. By the way, he's one of my heroes that inspired me to do it, by the way. And he adjusted and he became massively successful in some of the greatest interviews you've ever heard. So sometimes just because you think you're destined for something, especially at a young age, you have to be open when a door closes to open another door and see if you can walk through it and see what can happen for you,
And I do think that's like the universality of this section and this character specifically. But I also, it crossed my mind watching it this time that this may not read to a modern audience with exactly the same undertones it read in 2015, where we as a culture, as a world, really spent 14 years previous deeply reckoning with the pathology of suicide bombers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
right.
This story has come up time and time again of like the regretful assassin or the regretful bomber, right? Where, or they're coming up against realizing they were lied to, or that the promises made to them of the virgins and of the paradise was not true. And I think even in 2015, as 14 years removed from 9/11, that was still a pretty overwhelming and dominant cultural and social situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadly, I think it's always going to come around.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be people who are passionately believing in things right now that are going to watch this movie in a few years and go, oh, shit, So we've counted up all of our ammo.
I've only got 4 for Big Boy here, so he's all but useless. But we can squirt off this little pinky raunchy 29 times.
And then I love this line.
Anghard used to call them anti-seed. Plant one and watch something die.
Not a lot of lines in this movie, but what there are great.
Yeah.
And then now we're driving the rig out into the blue. Like this incredible, and this is where color correction and color control makes such a big difference. And there's a lantern like inside the war rig. And so what we have is the combo of the golden light from the lantern and the blue light from the moonlight. And this is, by the way, classic. If you've ever done color correction for a film, there is if you have a light that's an incandescent light, it has a gold tone, and sunlight's actually blue. And so this is actually the exact filters you would use to deal with blue and gold when you're color correcting. It's just, and it looks gorgeous together.
The blue thing is genius. The blue lighting here is genius because for us, it immediately stays in our mind as such an unusual thing. Why? Because later we're going to find out that that's the green place. So it has to stick in our mind in a certain way that makes us go, that when they reference, we go, oh my God. You're like, okay, wow, that has even more of an effect. So there's a genius in having it be so distinctly different from everything else we've encountered in the film,
And it makes sense for night to not be pitch black in this world.
Yeah.
This, we've seen enough of the, kind of otherworldly atmosphere that has occurred after nuclear fallout. Why not be blue, right? Yeah. Why not have this power of the moonlight that kind of shows the evening, incandescent light looking like something we don't have naturally occurring in our environment?
Yeah.
It's interesting because it is not a requirement for a film to have a unique look that is completely its own. Mm-hmm. But Mad Max Fury Road sure as hell does. You can't look at a frame of this movie and think it's any other movie ever made. It is Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
And something's going on with the war rig, and they swerve, and now they get caught in the mud, and the wheels are spinning, and Joe is coming, and you could see the red guitar guy contrasting with that blue light. Yeah. And Joe's car also stuck in the mud. I love that the doof warrior who's strumming his guitar, his strumming slows down as we come to a stop.
We are down 30,000 units of gasoline, 19 canisters of nitro, 12 assault bikes, 7 pursuit vehicles, the deficit mounts, and now, sir, you have us stuck in a quagmire.
I like that the People Eater can push back against the Immortan Joe a little bit.
I think they're all brothers.
Oh.
That's what I've always operated under, the perception in my head that they're all brothers. And they were each took certain sections.
Huh.
They're like the three little pigs. They've each got their own houses, right? And that's the kind of way I've always looked at it. Then I may not be right, and some of you who are way deeper into the Mad Max mythology who are listening to us may correct me on this, but I just have always seen it that way, which is why they can push back on Immortan Joe, which is why later the Bullet Eater or Bullet Farm, whatever his name is, goes after the wives here in a few minutes and doesn't care about killing them with his weapons because he can go toe to toe with Immortan Joe. So I think that's an element of it. Yeah.
And Joe is looking in through the window of the cab where we see Miss Giddy with the splendid Anharad and the organic mechanic, who is basically the doctor, played by Angus Sampson, says,
"Your girl is breathing her last."
What about the child?
He pulls out his little pipe to listen.
It's gone awful quiet in there. Get it out! Get it out!
And we realize, oh, Jesus, they're going to cut her open to try to save this baby.
He's in Furiosa as well, Angus Sampson, as the organic mechanic. He reminds me a lot of the guy from Road Warrior. The mechanic who has his legs and he's in that swing and he's telling him all the things that need to get fixed. It's kind of similar to that energy.
You stay here with your grief, Daddy. I'll fetch them for you. Be careful! Protect the assets!
And then he pulls a bullet out of his mouth. Does he have bullets for teeth?
Well,
is that what's happening here?
Bullet farmer, I think he does.
I've looked at it 3 times. I'm like, wait, are his teeth bullets?
I think it's like a farmer would have a piece of straw.
A straw?
Right, yeah. So he's the bullet farmer. He just chews on bullets.
As you do.
Yeah.
And then we see the organic mechanic pulling out a foot, a little tiny foot of a baby.
Another month. Could have been your viable human.
Was it a male?
Yeah, A1 Alpha Prime.
And Rictus, in a chant of triumph, says,
I had a little baby brother, and it was perfect.
Perfect everywhere!
It's weird. I mean, saying the things in this movie are weird is kind of a ridiculous statement, but
well, it's because we approach it from a place of our own normalcy, and this is not a normal world. So some guy flipping out about the death of his brother and screaming to the heavens about it because he's connected to that in some way is not unusual in this world.
Back with the rig, they've put down like metal plates to try to get some traction to get it out of the mud, but the bullet farmer's vehicle has tracks, so it is racing through.
Wouldn't want to shoot the wife, sir. Just probing.
And Furiosa comes out with that big sniper rifle, and the bullet farmer's getting closer, and the rig starts moving. And we're like, oh shit, what's happening? And we run after it, and there is Nux, the war boy.
There's high ground just beyond that thing.
He means the tree.
So Nux has never seen a tree, apparently.
I can do this. I know this machine.
He does. He's a rev head.
So now we learned that Nux has some skills, too.
Yeah.
The bullet farmer is still firing. Max has that sniper rifle. He fires. We've already heard this weapon only had 3 bullets. Now it only has 2. Now we only have 1 bullet. And the shot is on him. Furiosa comes up behind him. And again, it's this silent communication that I love so much. Is he knows that she's there. He hands the rifle back to her. He's kneeling. She uses his shoulder to steady her shot and says,
Don't breathe.
And hits the spotlight. And I love one little detail, by the way, is the buzzing in Max's ear because the gunshot just went off right next to his head.
Yeah.
This scene is this moment is super important. This is a real like threshold crossing moment for both of them. This relationship and it's like the moment we've been talking about how a human and machine kind of cross over to all this kind of like or organic symmetry in this movie. This is like the moment of ignition, right? This is where bonds of trust engaged, right? And you cannot have the ending of this movie without this happening here. You can't keep cheating along with this idea of like a distrust or a situation where the two of them are bickering or not, coming around to the other one's skill. This is the moment that we have, just past the halfway mark of the film is very vital that it happens right here and that we now continue to build in their relationship from a level of trust.
Many things. The first is, before we started recording, we were having a conversation about editing and how we will take out something that someone misspoke or some way. I'm, Brendan, going to leave in your misspeak because you said crush when you meant to say cross, and that I actually think that might be a perfect Freudian slip for this moment because it's not a crush in the sense of, but there is a connection that happens in this moment. And I was going like, since the death of his family, has Max had anyone who he can trust the way he's going to trust Furiosa?
Through the 3 movies, I don't think he has.
He's had children. He's had subordinates who he winds up becoming parental toward them, in both the second and third film. But I can't think of anything where he has an equal partner.
Like the gyro captain comes close, but
not he's really. The gyro captain wants them to have that relationship, and Max very much does not.
Yeah, that's low. Yeah. They don't quite have the relationship, but that would really be the only possibility. But yeah, so you're right about pointing this out, Steve, because and Brendan, because this is the moment where there is a connection and there is a trust, and he sees an equal, which I don't think he's experienced yet, which is important because as the film goes on, she really takes center stage even more so as the film goes on.
Well, I kind of think it's one of those things where he has known for the last hour that she is an equal. He's aware of that in the hand-to-hand combat of it, and this is his surrender to his own kind of blockade in his brain and his piggishness, right? This is like, okay, I'm wrong. This is the person to shoot this gun, not me. I can give it up.
Yeah, because Max in no way would never let anyone stand behind him and tell him, breathe, calm down, let me, that would have never happened in any of those other movies. It happens in this one.
You know, it's interesting, Brendan, in our first part, you brought up a sort of, romantic comedy structure and how that relates to this. And I think in general, buddy movie structure and romantic comedy structure are the same thing.
Yep.
So, Mel Gibson and Danny Glover are going to argue for the first half of Lethal Weapon until they finally realize that they are the perfect partner for each other and they build their friendship.
Right.
We don't have any of the argument. I mean, other than them fighting at the very, when they first meet, there's just like and it's so weird, but there's like without dialogue, without anything but these looks and these moments, there is a profound connection here. So we got Nux is helping pull out this winch because we're going to attach the giant war rig to this tiny little frail tree. And while they're setting this up, we cut back to the bullet farmer. Oh, this moment is so great. They have a flare in front of his face. You could see his face is kind of fucked up because of the explosion of the light that Furiosa shot out.
Hold up a flare! I am holding a flare! Closer! It's right in front of your eyes!
The bullet farmer realizes he's blind and screams.
Ah! Yeah, the scream of anger and frustration and maybe even guilt at himself for holding back when he should have been going after them full bore. But
unfortunately, the winch will not reach the tree. And Nux looks down at the chain around his waist, and we go, and it's just, anytime you can use a prop for 17 different things and have it transform in its uses through the course of the film is really cool. So Capable cuts off the chain from Nux, and we bring it to Max to extend it to get around the tree, and then we go back to the bullet farmer, who is screaming,
I am the scales of justice! Conductor of the choir of death!
I love this, the conductor of the choir of death. That's amazing. I mean, that's just amazing. And the visuals here with the blue light behind him, almost Halo-like, and the shot with both machine guns going, it's an awesome shot.
Don't they know they're shooting at us?
There's such a weird thing with the wives because they are, on the one hand, slaves, sexual slaves as breeding stock with no freedom, controlled by this monster. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible thing. On the other hand, they're really privileged. Cheeto can't accept the idea that they would be firing on us, even though there have been people dying around them all day.
Wasn't Cheeto the one that wanted to run back, though?
Yes.
So she's still tied somewhat to that situation. So, yeah, she'll right. In a way, she's privileged because she's just like, well, I want to run back to it because I can. And then when the shooting is, do they know they're shooting us? We're supposed to be special.
We're the special people.
Yeah, we're special people, yeah.
And the tree is now starting to bend as the rig is pulling on it. I like that Furiosa gets behind and pushes on the rig. I'm like, that's not gonna help Furiosa, but okay. And the wheels finally catch as the trees go down. There are explosions all around.
I never thought I'd do something as shine as that.
How are the engines?
Very hot and real thirsty.
Max grabs a fuel can and some other stuff and says,
You need to take the war rig half a click down the track.
What if you're not back by the time the engines are cooled?
Well, you keep moving.
This is another piece too, I think, because now he's fully on the team. Not only is he fully on the team, but he's willing for the team to go without him if he can't keep up.
What do you suppose he's gonna do?
Retaliate first.
Which is weird 2 words to put together, but I really like. And then off in the distance, there's a big explosion. Birds fly overhead. Wives come out to look. Furiosa raises her weapon as we see this figure come out of the dust and the mist. And then we see it's Max loaded down with stuff, including a steering wheel and ammo belts and a whole bunch of other stuff. His head is covered in blood. And Nux is just staring at him in total wonder. He's even gotten an extra shoe because we're missing a shoe.
Are you hurt? You're bleeding.
And I love that Furiosa understands this right away.
That's not his blood.
Gentlemen, what do you think of this moment?
Well, it's key to the fact that he told them to, not wait for him when he went and did this, which will play in a few minutes when they meet the Vuvalini, that they now fully trust Max.
Yeah.
Right? They can see his selflessness and that his sacrifice or potential sacrifice will benefit them. Of course, he comes back with all this stuff, which is integral to him surviving in this situation, but it's also for them. He has brought gas for the full rig. He has brought bullets for all of them to be protected. And it's in a way, this is like, again, I mentioned that he has crossed the threshold here as a team member, but it's also they have understood this is someone in service to them. Yeah, that's like a huge deal.
I also think it's cool in this movie where we have seen the most crazy action you could possibly imagine that we did this off camera, and just let it live in your imagination.
I guess.
You would have liked to see it.
Yeah, I would like to have seen the billet farmer eat it really hard at Max's feet. But that being said, the explosion in the distance, again, it's a nice way of throwing in some surprising mystery into your film that lets you do all the thinking about how it all went down. But Max showing up with all that blood, once again, Max wins,
I think there's also something to that in terms of trying to do as best as you can for a character who has been stripped of so much from the moment that this movie starts, including his sanity. It's important to not make him a total monster or machine, right? So we know that he just went off and did some unthinkable shit to these guys. Yeah. But at the same time, it's like we do need him to still be human, right? We need him to be a survivor, a protector, a teammate, and not just like, the fucking Terminator just went out there and tore heads off
a blind guy.
And then Max stood, he's covered in blood, so he goes to the big tanker truck to get some liquid out of it, splashes it on his face, and goes, "What is this?"
It's mother's milk. And
you go back to that image of all the women who were being pumped, and it's like, oh my God, they filled this whole tanker with mother. I mean, and what is so cool about the moment to me is that Max sort of takes that in and just goes, well, I have to wash my face. Like he's just a practical person.
Well, I like the symbolism being baptized by it in a way. Like he's being cleaned by the thing that came out of them. It's the final, like, boom, we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a great point. I hadn't thought about it as a baptism, but the Max that we see from this point forward is very different.
Yes.
We're driving, and as we drive, we see these guys on stilts in the mud doing something that just looks so alien and bizarre, and it is so cool, and we just see it, and we go past it. We don't explain it. To me, this is like, I call this the luxury of the unnecessary. There was they don't need this for the movie. And most of the time when you're making a movie, you're just so desperately trying just to tell your story that you don't have, if you put a little English on something or a cool shot somewhere, you're going to do it. And here it's like, we have this whole thing. There's a whole world and a culture that we just drive by that's super interesting. And that's it,
I thought it was the crows from The Wiz, but different crows, I guess.
I think I've told you, John, that in my 8th grade musical that I acted in, at my almost entirely white junior high school, we did The Wiz.
Well, why not?
With one African-American kid who played Dorothy.
Oh, that's good. At least the lead was black.
I mean, I just like thinking about that is like the most embarrassing.
Wow.
And one of our patrons played the Cowardly Lion.
Oh,
Matt
nice.
Grieber, brother of John Grieber from Skywalker Sound, who will be seen very soon at a Cine-Files thing, was the Cowardly Lion to my Lord High underling. That's who I played.
That's hilarious.
It's daytime now. Furiosa's driving. Max wakes up from a dream.
And is this the dream where you get the flash frames of the bug eyes?
Yes. And the hands.
Yeah. And so those are the bug eyes from Mad Max 1. And then also reused in The Road Warrior. That's like one of the few moments of the movie where there's actually something physically from the other films put into this one.
What's interesting, too, about this moment, and it relates, John, to what you said about the baptism, I hadn't thought about, is that really this is the first clean version of Tom Hardy's face that we see in the whole movie.
Yeah.
We're like in it because he had the huge beard, and then he's running, and then he's got a metal mask on his face, and then there's all sorts of chaos, and there's blood on his face, and now it's like, oh, there he is. You know.
How do you know this place even exists?
I was born there.
So why'd you leave?
I didn't. I was taken as a child.
They had worked out what Furiosa was while they were developing this movie. At one point, they were talking about shooting them at the same time.
It's pretty clear if you read between the lines in the interviews with Charlize that she was mad that they didn't do a Furiosa prequel with her. And I liked Furiosa. I thought Anya Taylor-Joy did a great job. But you can tell that she had a lot of ownership for this character. And so she was a little miffed. And considering how you said earlier to begin this whole series of conversations about this movie, that her and George Miller worked very tightly together and for a long time to develop this film, she probably felt a little bit betrayed that she didn't get a chance to come back and play the character for the prequel, you know?
I wonder what that thought process was. I mean, I get it. It's like this is a character 15 years younger.
Yeah, of course.
Than Furiosa. So
yeah.
And you're making it 8 years after you made, Max. So I get why there's reasons to do it, but
This is the best shot I'll ever have.
And
They're looking for hope.
what about you?
Redemption.
I think that's a key moment and just a really, I don't think she's ever said that to any other human, I don't think Furiosa has shared, or Max has shared anything with anyone in decades, Brendan, something that you said at the beginning that continues to blow my mind, which is the idea that these are myths, that these are not supposed to be taken literally. Where it really clicked for me is in this scene, because it suddenly occurred to me, Max and Furiosa are relatively close to the same age. But Furiosa clearly grew up after the fall of civilization. And so the age-wise, it doesn't make any sense. And that really goes to your point for me, that it totally makes sense if these are myths, And then we have a shot of Capable leaning on Nux. He sees a bug crawling on her. He goes on his finger. He looks at it. He eats it. The studio was not pleased. They tried so hard to force George Miller to cut the bug eating moment out of the movie.
Why?
I don't know.
That's such a nothing moment. I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's such a perfect little joke, too, because everything about it is set up with the tenderness that you would set something up in that way. And then he doesn't eat it as a gag, right? It's not like a chomp. It's a perfectly natural thing that every one of these people would do in this environment where they have no food at all times.
Yeah.
Listen, with what's going on the planet, we're all going to be eating bugs. It's not even entirely a joke. It's a source of protein that can be grown easily.
Hey, let's go.
We reach the top of a ridge and we look out and we see some kind of tower, and Furiosa says,
I remember something like that.
They drive towards it, and there is a naked woman on top of this tower screaming for help. Max immediately says,
That's bait.
And becomes one of the greatest memes
Exactly.
ever. One of the greatest gifts ever used.
Reaction gift for the ages.
Yeah, for the ages, for sure.
I am one of the Vuvalini! Of the many mothers! My initiate mother was K.D. Concannon. I am the daughter of Mary Jobasa.
and now we see a bunch of motorcycles appear, and they come down the dunes to Furiosa, and the naked woman who is on top of this tower slides down on a rope, which, by the way, I don't slide down on ropes naked. That seems very, very, you really chafe when you do that. I would avoid it. But she grabs some robes because she was the bait, and she runs up to her and embraces her. And I love the tenderness of the embrace and the sort of hand on the back of the head. It's just very lovely. And this is Megan Gale playing the Valkyrie. And these older women walk up. These are the Vuvalini.
With something in the eyes. Perhaps it is Jobasa's child.
Valkyrie, who is clearly deeply moved and remembers her, says,
"This is our Furiosa."
So, like the wives, the Vuvalini women, these older women, were all brought in for many, many weeks to meet each other, to bond, create relationships, and to practice combat and weapons use. And it's like older women of a certain age aren't generally given that gig, you know? And they had a ball. They all thought it was an amazing experience. And I just think George Miller gave so much honor to everyone involved in this movie. He made everyone who frequently aren't treated as important, treated as really, really important.
How long has it been?
7,000 days, plus the ones I don't remember.
Furiosa, what happened to your mother?
She died on the third day.
And they all do this gesture that's this mourning gesture. And to me, it's like, it parallels the Witness Me and all of the, you know, it's like this is the ritual that they've built around death, which is to honor the dead.
The men, who are they?
They're reliable. They helped us get here.
there's one of your keys too. There is that like these are not our saviors. These are not the solution to the problem. These are reliable hands. We can do this, but we found some reliable hands along the way.
And one of the women we meet who's just key for everything is Melissa Joffer, who is the keeper of the seeds.
Yeah, an incredible actress who's been working since the 1960s in Australian films and TV shows, from stuff like Homicide to Matlock Police to Kings to Harp in the South, The Country Practice, Grassroots. So many incredible things that she has done, and she speaks glowingly about being part of this movie and the role that she gets to play here as kind of one of the oldest survivors of this civilization, so to speak, and what she gets to do in the film. And she gets a hell of a death, but it's a noble death, in my opinion.
So I don't know which one of the Vuvalini this is, but one of them was almost in the original Mad Max.
Oh, wow.
One of them, so the actress playing Max's wife got injured in the course of the shooting, and they were looking to replace her. And they went and they cast this young woman, and her parents wouldn't let her do it. Her parents said, absolutely not. You're not acting in this crazy, violent, independent film. And so 40 years later, she finally gets to be in a Mad Max movie, which I just love. But I not sure which of the Vuvalini it is. And I love the moment where the Vuvalini, these old, weathered women, go to the wives.
Where did you find such creatures?
And they're touching them almost like they're works of art, or something from an alien world.
This one has all her teeth.
I can't wait for them to see it.
See? See what?
Home. The green place.
And already I'm feeling dread, because it can't go right. That's not how movies work.
You're past it.
The crows. That creepy place with all the crows.
And the way George Miller films this is so brilliant because it's all about Furiosa.
Yeah.
We're going to hear voices saying things, and the voices are going to become increasingly subjective in terms of the use of echo and reverb as we push in on Furiosa, because we know that she had put everything on finding the green place. And she'd made these promises to these people about finding the green place. And she had all these memories of this wonderful place that she had been taken away from.
The soil.
We had to get out.
We had no water, and
The water was filth.
it was poisoned. It was sour.
And then the crows came.
We couldn't grow anything.
Where are the others?
What others?
The many mothers.
We're the only ones left.
I love the way he films this because it's going around her.
Yeah.
So it's like, you've seen that in movies before where things are happening and it feels like the camera's moving around you. I know Michael Bay loves to do that stuff, but in certain films you can see him spinning around and like it's getting all the information at once, and it unsettles her. And I don't know if the crows mean the actual crows or those things that were walking on the stilts. Are those considered the crows? I don't know. But like when she pulls away and starts to walk off, she takes off her arm and does the thing that she does. And it's so powerful. Because the redemption is I think the redemption is no longer possible. The redemption she wanted is no longer possible. So now she's going to have to adjust from what she wanted to what else she can do now.
In a weird way, it parallels what's happened to Nux, because she has built her whole identity on this thing and made this choice to risk everything to do this, and it's all come to nothing. And I think her performance is so great, and she's been so solid and decisive and just absolutely in control up until this moment. And now, as you say, she drops the arm. She's very, very shaky. She walks forward, stumbling almost, drops to her knees. The shot of the sand blowing beneath her, and she screams in just gut-wrenching agony. And Max is watching, deeply moved. And what's so amazing about this is we've set up this moment, which I find super emotional, with very little dialogue, no backstory, just like, here we are. And it just works so well.
Do we feel confident saying that in a movie filled with some of the most incredible sights that you'll see in modern filmmaking, that this is the shot, right? Like this to me reads like the shot you would use to shorthand Mad Max Fury Road in like, you remember those Chuck Workman Oscar montages that would air like at the beginning of the show, and it'd be like, 100 years of film, and it would just be, you'd get Peter O'Toole blowing out the match, or Gary Cooper standing in the middle of town as the camera pulled up. Like, that's this shot for me for this movie. If you want to communicate Mad Max Fury Road as a masterpiece 20, 30, 40 years from now, you use this shot.
It's not the Doof Warrior shooting flames out of his guitar.
I mean, that's the shot I have on a loop in my house. But...
Naturally. What's crazy about this is Charlize Theron's idea. This shot. She's like, I need a thing here. There's more here. And she said, look, just let me react to this emotionally. It wasn't in the shooting schedule. And George said, okay. And John Seal, who's the DP, as they're shooting, he's like, that ridge up there is going to be perfect at golden hour. And so they're shooting all day. And now the sun is starting to set, and they rush up. Everyone's grabbing equipment to rush up to the top of this hill. And they did it it's like 2 takes before they ran out of light. And the wind just cooperated. That's not a fan. That's just the wind on the area. Like, it's an amazing moment.
And I like that he keeps the camera away from her. We don't have to see it in close up. It's great.
No, it's not. It's not our place to. We don't get that. You're not going to be over her shoulder for this. You have to let her have her sorrow, and you watch from a distance.
Yep. It's now, we fade to black, and we come back again in that beautiful blue, and we have the wives talking to the Vuvalini. And I love this conversation.
That's what you call a satellite.
Miss Kitty told us about those. They used to bounce messages across the earth.
Shows. Everyone in the old world had a show.
Even funnier today.
I was just going to say the same thing. I was totally going to say the same thing.
Do you think there's still somebody out there? Sending shows?
Who knows? Those are the plains of silence.
That's a line you could keep with you and think about for a long time. And then I love how they pair these up, because now we have Dag with the Keeper of the Seeds, and we realize that Dag is also pregnant.
Stay right where you are, little Joe. Kind of lost its novelty out here.
You having a baby?
Warlord Jr. Gonna be so ugly.
And I like that the hope is it could be a girl,
Yeah.
You kill people with that, do ya?
Killed everyone I ever met out here. Headshots, all of them, snap right in the medulla.
Thought somehow you girls were above all that.
And then she brings Dag over, pulls out a bag, and opens it up, and is filled with seeds.
I plant one every chance I get.
Where?
So far, nothing's took. Earth's too sour.
So many different kinds.
Trees, flowers, fruit. Back then, everyone had their fill.
Again, nailing a character in like one moment. We have the gun, and we have the seeds, and the woman who's trying to bring life back to the earth. That's amazing.
Yeah, and Dag, in a way, filling in where Splendid was, right? Like her taking a little more impetus. She's next up as the pregnant person, so she is now more in danger than all of the other ones. And the conversation back and forth, I think, is great. Old woman with younger woman about all of the things that are gone. And, this is the thing about humanity, right? No matter how terrible it is, there's always someone who believes it's possible to return, right? And there's a possible to come back. It's possible to fix. It's possible to replenish. And her being the keeper of the seeds, that's super important. That's someone who still believes the world can flourish again. The world can be better, right? And so her explaining that to Dag, I think, is a really important moment of conveying her role and possibly passing that on to Dag to carry on as well. So it's a fascinatingly beautiful moment between the both of them.
What I find most interesting about it is, if we're going to pick who is the most violent of the wives, it's probably the Dag.
Ironically, Dag, yeah.
And yet she is also pregnant, which is the maternal side. And we had Splendid, who had said a bullet was the seed that when you plant it, you die. Yeah. And Dag is fascinated by the Keeper of the Seeds weapon at first, and they're talking about killing people when she's talking about being pregnant, and then she brings out the seeds, which are the symbol of fertility. I think there's just this connection all around with this moment,
Here, talk to you.
And I think she looks really broken, by the way. I think there's a real hopelessness in the way that she says this plan.
We're never gonna have a better chance to make it across the salt. If we leave the rig here and load the motorcycles up with as much as we can maybe ride for 160 days. One of those bikes is yours. Fully loaded.
What I really like about it, again, it's the unspoken nature of their relationship and what that means to come with us and what she feels about him and how she trusts him.
I'll make my own way.
And she kind of nods and heads away, and then he gives her his advice.
You know, hope is a mistake. If you can't fix what's broken, you'll go insane.
John, I hate to say this, but this is the line that popped in my head when you were texting me this morning about the things going on in the world.
Well, I love this back and forth because it's her fully accepting him too, right?
Yeah.
And her wanting him to be part of this. And I love that you have behind them the three Vuvalini ladies there who are just kind of keeping watch to make sure this all goes the way it goes. And the way George has been positioned them there, they're very distinct in their stances on purpose. But then Max, because Max hasn't, in the other movies, Max occasionally drops these pearls of wisdom, and him saying this in frame while she's moved behind him, that's on purpose, right? And it's on purpose to make it clear that although this is pretty much Furiosa's story, Max is still going to have his moments to stand out. And this moment where he says, if you don't fix what's broken, you're just going to go crazy. And it's like a mental health thing. If you don't confront this thing, you're going to lose your stuff. You've got to confront it. You've got
I disagree. That's not what he's saying. That's
what I think he's saying.
He doesn't say if you don't fix what's broken. He says if you can't fix what's broken. He's saying walk away. He's saying you can't fix it. You have to just let it go. Walk away, which is what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
What do you think Max, for the entirety of his saga so far, has been trying to fix?
Yeah. The guilt over the loss of his wife and kid because he wasn't there. Absolutely. That is 100%. That's why he reluctantly is always drawn into saving kids or saving a community from bullies, because he wasn't there to save his wife from Toe Cutter and all those people there and his child.
And that his impulse every time is to not do it at first.
Yeah, to not do it at first. Right. Yeah. But because it's an emotional, because he's going to have to reconnect with the pain of the loss and the guilt all over again. And so it's hard. And so that's why I think he is saying, if you can't do it, you'll go crazy. I'm not saying, so we'll just disagree with that, Steve. I think he's saying if you can't do it, you'll go crazy. You need to do it. And as opposed to like, you should let it go. I think because he's never let it go. He's always held on to it. It's what drives him, for better or worse.
It's so funny because I think I totally hear your points, and I go like,
oh yeah, you don't have to agree with me. Yeah, totally.
I am confident in the fact that I do not have to agree with you.
Okay.
I think in a weird way it's both, because Max is a guy who keeps getting drawn in to care about things where his first instinct is to not get involved, and then he gets involved, and that's what's happening right here as well. But he also is a tortured person who all of his experiences have driven him insane. It's like he's also saying, look, I've gotten involved a bunch of times and it's only left me crazier because I've never been able to resolve these things.
What do you think he's worked out on that little piece of cloth? What is that?
I think he already has the plan to go back to the Citadel. I think he had that thought before. And he is choosing, but he knows that's going to just be pain and chaos. And so that's why he's walking away. He's not sharing that plan yet.
Oh, see, I think he's doing a map of the area because he has never been in this area.
I think that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I took it to be kind of both things. Like he is mapping out where, like it's his cartography, right? Like how have I been around this wasteland, right? And he is fairly confident that where they're going is nothing till their death, right?
Yeah.
That they will find nothing till they're dead. So, like, I feel like he's got the calculation in his mind that allows him to say, well, you're not going to make this plan you have is no good, without him telling them that, because it's not his place to say you have a dumb plan. But he's also, I don't know that he has fully triggered it in himself yet. He's not activated the switch that's like, best plan is to go back, right? Like, he has to drive away and kind of suss this out and then see them again and tell them.
He is up on a ridge. It's daytime. He's watching them way off in the distance, disappearing into the desert. The camera pushes in on him, and again we hear those voices.
Where are you? Help us. You promised to help us.
And there is this kid in front of him who does a gesture like he's throwing something at Max, and Max brings up his hand. I did it so Brendan and John could see, right in front of his face in a very recognizable gesture. And then he looks out and sees that the kid is now way out in the desert with Furiosa and the motorcycles and yells,
Come on, Pa. Let's go.
and now he is riding hell-bent for leather to catch up to them, pulls in front of them, stops in front of them, looks at Furiosa, and then puts this map that he has been working on with that red symbol, I think, for the Citadel on her bike.
All right. This is your way home.
We go back?
And she says, I love this line, I thought you weren't insane anymore.
I also think there's a little foreshadowing here, because what the kid does to him, that's the same body position he will be in when that steel arrow comes through his hand to his head.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And that's the turning point in the fight for him.
Yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of that. And the guilt, again, a child telling him, you got to go.
Well, thinking it through from what you talked about, Steve, I think that, you know, in the totality of this sequence, he pocketed that idea of going back because he knew it involved him, right? So it's basically like, all right, I've worked this out. I've got my math. I've shown my work, and that way's no good. The only actual plan is to go back, but that will require more than just, you know, riding some motorcycles. You got to take the whole thing and go all the way through. And he is reluctant to do that until he is reminded through these visions that you've been down this path before, buddy, and you feel nothing but pain and shame and guilt over it. So you got to go tell them what you know.
Yeah.
Well, and it's sort of it's better to try and die than to go insane in the desert over guilt. That's I think where he is.
I think also another amazing thing about the making of this to point out is that the way those characters react to him saying go back is literally how everyone reacted in 1998 during their story sessions when they came up with this idea. Everyone they told about it was like, why would you go back? That's crazy. And they had this plan from the earliest possible sessions of putting this together as a story, you know, back right after they did Babe Pig in the City. They were like, oh no, this is a chase in this direction, and then to finish the movie up, we chase in the other direction. And it stuck the entire process.
What's there to find at the Citadel?
Green.
And water. There's a ridiculous amount of clear water. And a lot of crops.
It's got everything you need, as long as you're not afraid of heights.
Where does the water come from?
He pumps it up from deep in the earth, calls it aqua-cola, and claims it all for himself.
And because he owns it, he owns all of us.
I don't like him already.
And Valkyrie's talking about like, well, it would take several weeks to get around the mountains and go. And Max interrupts her and says,
No, I suggest we go back the same way we came. So we take the war rig and we charge it right through the middle of them. We can decouple the tanker at the pass, shut it off behind us.
Kaboom.
Because Joe has brought his entire army out. And so if they can get past him and get back to the Citadel and block the pass, then they have the high ground in the Citadel and they'll take it easily. And I love that Capable says,
And we'll be with Nux. He's a war boy. He'll be bringing us home, bringing back what's stolen as he's meant to.
that's the actual manifest destiny. Like I don't know if Capable is consciously going, I'm taking the mythology that Nux was, connected to, and I'm transforming it into doing this good deed for him. And they look at Nux, who's much less pale, looks much more like skin tone now.
Yeah. Feels like hope.
So this is very cool.
Look, it'll be a hard day, but I guarantee you that 160 days ride that way, there's nothing but salt. At least that way, we might be able to, together, come across some kind of redemption.
And Furiosa thinks, and we have a great, it's not Predator level, but Max puts his hand up and Furiosa looks at it, and then we have that big hand grab. It's nice.
Yeah.
We're back with the Immortan Joe, and they're just kind of having a lazy moment. They're sitting quietly. The guitar player is passed out in his little hammock, and some war boy is working on the people eater's swollen feet, which is just amazingly disgusting.
I think, though, that's the first time you really see that's a detail of the people eater, that he has these, feet with growths on them, giant bunion feet. And it's important. It becomes a detail that factors into the action sequence. It's like you talked about this a bunch of times, Steve, about how this is just like 10,000 ideas in this movie. And then you get a shot where then that idea then will play in somewhere else. And this we will come back to these big feet.
That's them. Why are they going back?
Do they wish to surrender?
They're going back to the Citadel. They know it's undefended.
So suddenly, they have an oh shit moment, and they all jump in their cars and start driving. It's super loud. Inside the war rig, the camera pulls back to the keeper of the seeds, who's sitting in the front seat and smiles. And the thought I had on this gorgeous shot of her face and her smiling is I think George Miller finds these older women absolutely as beautiful as he finds the wives. That's what I see. I think he loves them just as much. And I think that's kind of amazing. So vehicles are coming in from every direction, including Max's car, who is still out there. And I love that Max sees it and goes, "That's my car."
Dude, where's my car? There it is.
Dude, where's my car? And then we have slit on the hood of Max's car, dripping is it nitro into the intake of the car? Is this a thing? Can you do this? Like pour liquid gas into the exhaust and have it? I don't know if this works, but it does. And it's like acting like a turbo. And Nux goes out to do the same thing on the rig and is sucking fuel out of a hose and spitting it in with like flames coming out of the exhaust as they race. It's so, the level of this is so cool as I'm watching this movie is just really high.
And I love that he's getting called out by his Slim. It's like, you're a traitor. You betrayed us. How could you? And all that kind of stuff. So we get that confrontation between the two guys now on opposite sides. They'd already had their issues from the beginning. Now this adds even more to their issues.
Gotta back off. Engine 1 is gone. 2's about to blow.
Valkyrie comes up, takes out one car with a thunder stick. Then they crash. She rolls out of the way of one car. Valkyrie stands up, grabs her rifle, and is firing straight at Joe and would hit him, except for it looks like the Giga car is equipped with bulletproof glass, I guess, because it doesn't go through the glass. And then she dives out of the way, covering the other woman as the monster truck just goes over them. And then she stands up firing after them as the people eater, his big rig, comes up and just takes her out from behind.
He steers it gleefully into her to kill her, which I think makes us hate him even more.
Exactly.
When Max is going to take out his revenge. Yeah,
and they're very clear to make it be the already detestable looking character.
Yes, with the tongue sticking out.
And again, we see that death gesture from the Vuvalini. And by the way, the reason that she dies, she did not die in the original storyboards. But she had, I don't quite understand the details, but she had some trip, and it might have been another gig or something. And she went to George Miller. It's kind of like, "Look, I don't want to abandon the shoot, but I have this thing. What do you think?" And George said, "Well, I mean, we could come up with a great death for you." And she was like, "Awesome." And so they killed her so she could leave. It's the back of the tanker, and they're spearing it with these, it's like spear guns with, cables on them. Max, who's now like a wash in mother's milk, cuts another line, sending a car careening into the other. And now we get to the polecats.
It's amazing how these polecats, it's like oh, the polecats have entered the chat, right? Like,
yeah,
you've got these harpooners, there's masked marauders, which actually is kind of cool that, like, you know, we've had everything, you know, very earthbound in these fight scenes and these chase scenes, but this is almost like maritime, right? Like these guys are shooting harpoons. There's like swashbuckling pirate stuff, like or like the sand skiff in Return of the Jedi, where these masked guys are jumping on and they're having hand-to-hand combat. But you cannot. I mean, I'm trying to take myself right back to like 2015 and my mentality, like when I was in the theater watching this, and I just remember just so much energy and just the rush and the dopamine. Once these guys come on these poles, it's like the ultimate surrender to this movie. Like you've done so much. I can't believe you're doing even more. This is the greatest thing ever.
I love that he held them in reserve. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like he's like, well, I'm not going to show you these things. We got a whole other level to get to in this action sequence. This idea came from George Miller, who saw some street performers who were like climbing on poles and doing acrobatics on these poles. He's like, hey, can we do something with this? And he assumed there was no way to do this with humans. And so no way to do it with humans with real moving vehicles. And so the first plan was, you know, the Hollywood way to do it, which is to do it on a stage in front of a green screen, and they'd composite it into the action sequences. And they did a test. And it just, particularly because they knew they were doing all these other real stunts everywhere else, it just didn't look good. Yeah. And so they was like, okay, well, what else could we do? And one of the stunt performers had a buddy who was a Cirque du Soleil guy.
Of course.
And so they reach out to Cirque du Soleil and they bring a bunch of guys that are good at this kind of thing. And it's sort of like we talked about with the motorcycles, is they said, well, what can you do? At first they started playing with what could they do? And this is technologically, this is so difficult. Because nothing like this has ever been done. And so they go, okay, well, first of all, we need to go, how springy is the material of these poles? Like, do you want them to flex a little? Do you want them totally rigid? And so they keep changing the materials to get something that's right. And then the way the counterbalance works is that there's humans on the bottom of these poles that are weights that are pushing them in one direction or the other. So it's not just that there's someone hanging on the pole that has to coordinate these things. It's the humans on the bottom that are the weights going back and forth, and they had to all be in sync. And they started off doing this still, static, played around, and they said, okay, let's start moving them on a vehicle. So now they're moving very, very slowly to practice how you're going to do it. And then they started doing it faster and faster. They had real serious rules about who got to go on polecat. You were not allowed to do a polecat unless you could climb it unassisted 3 times. That was really important. You needed that level of upper body strength. And they kept playing with it. And by the way, you know, we've talked about Jackie Chan, who's a hero of mine on the show. This is how Jackie Chan works, is that he gets the props and he gets all his people, and then they just play for months to try to figure out what you can do with it. They had months of just playing with these things to make it all work. And they even had things where, so you have the guys who are the weights, you have the guys on top of the polecats, and then they're grabbing each other, which means they're tied in on cables. So they have to be able to untie themselves to jump onto the war rig or jump onto a different vehicle. All of this stuff happening in real time on vehicles that are moving while all this is happening. It is the craziest fucking thing.
Yeah.
Inside the cab, we're looking up through the sunroof as a guy swings over, gets Furiosa in a noose. The keeper takes him out with the butt of her rifle. Then she's grabbed by another guy who's trying to pull her out and stabs her. And the look of like shock and amazement on the keeper of the seed's face as she settles back down into the war rig is really powerful. Everything's kind of out of focus in the background, and we hear,
Are you okay? I think she's hurt.
And we see her hands reach back shakily for something, and we realize she's reaching for the bag of seeds, which the dad gives her. And I think it's such perfect, simple storytelling. It's so little time with this character, and yet we 100% feel for this woman and her connection to the seeds and everything that symbolizes.
Again, like we've said before numerous times in movies past, casting is so important. You cast a veteran actress like this who can bring, in the limited amount of screen time, just some energy, something about her that you immediately connect to as a viewer of this movie, and you buy into the weight and the years that she has been in the world of this movie and has survived up until this point. And the death is pretty brutal. He doesn't stab her. He uses like one of those those electric shears that you cut like weeds with from branches from trees or bushes Like he used that. So it's a brutal death, but it's covered up by the scarf. And I love that her death is noble. Like she sits there, and like you said, they bring the bag onto her, and she holds on to it because she's having a final moments on this earth with the things that she has collected and she loves the most. You know, so it's a beautiful death, man. Like you said, he loves them as much as he loves the wives and gives them those moments, you know.
Max takes out a guy with a chainsaw who's about to kill Furiosa. He goes forward, and then a guy in a mask with a crossbow pops up out of nowhere. And at this moment, Max has exactly the same vision of the kid who seemed to be throwing something to his face. He reacts in that exact same way with his hand to his face, stopping the crossbow bolt, which embeds itself a little bit in his forehead. And Max goes down.
Hey, stay with me. Stay with me.
And the voice merges between the little girl and the Vuvalini who is with him. She's fighting someone off as Max kind of struggles to his feet. And I love the look of just bewilderment on Tom Hardy's face as he realizes he has a hand stuck to his forehead, which he pulls out. That's just awesome. Then he gets tossed off the truck, and Furiosa catches him with the metal arm by the ankle.
Yeah.
So much of this movie is out of the frying pan into the fire. It's like 97 layers of out of the frying pan into the fire. It's just always going to get worse. And again, this reminded me of another Jackie Chan thing. So if you remember, because I'm fascinated with the way he choreographs action, and I don't know if George Miller is a fan of Jackie Chan or anything like that, but if you watch like old martial arts movies, like if you watch Fist of Fury or The Big Boss, whenever Bruce Lee's fighting multiples, there's like a circle of guys around him. And one or two are coming at a time that he fights, and everybody else is waiting. And the thing that they used to do in those old Hong Kong movies was the guys in the circle would just move their feet kind of back and forth. So it kind of looks like they're doing something, even though they're really just waiting for their turn to attack. And what Jackie's innovation was you always have someone coming in from off camera that you don't see the moment before. So you're not seeing someone wait to attack. And that what he does in the fight choreography is that person will yell off screen so that Jackie could turn at just the right moment and deal with something that came from his blind side. This movie is filled with something's always coming in from the blind side. There's always another element every single time. You never get to just deal with one thing. But it never feels like someone's waiting to attack.
I always notice that when I watch group attacks. The worst is when you're seeing the stunt man just waiting, or the stunt woman just waiting.
Yep.
You're like, oh, come on. And John Wick is really guilty of that. When you watch John Wick, you slow down some of those, you can see these guys are just like patiently waiting for their time. And to me, when you notice it, it kills some of those fight sequences. But yeah, it's clear that they're doing that on purpose. Whereas with Jackie, he's much smarter about covering that up.
So another guy climbs in from the other side of the war rig and stabs Furiosa in the side. Mm-hmm. A keeper gets rid of him.
Keeper of the Seeds, right? Her final act, I think, is killing this guy, isn't it?
I think so.
In his eye, yeah.
And now Max is slipping out of Furiosa's hands because she's got a knife in her side, you know? And then we see Max's car, that old Ford Interceptor, coming up again with a slit, and Furiosa swerves into him, crushing it between the two trucks. He flips over and explodes, and we can have a moment of silence for Max's car. I think this is truly the end of it. Nux comes out, looks at Max, and this is the one moment where I feel like the physics doesn't perfectly work, but Nux kicks Max onto the People Eater's rig, and the physics seem not quite there. It's still kind of awesome. Max climbs up, jumps in the cab, punches out the People Eater, and now he is in control of the beautiful Mercedes limo that the People Eater uses as the front of this war rig.
I did want to point out that there's a moment for Nux here where he registers that Furiosa has been stabbed. And the look on his face is that he knows she's fucked. And you read that. And that means something from this guy who has only known death, right? He knows his own imminent death. And all these war boys know what combat deaths are. It stuck out to me this time watching it, was like, oh man, that is the movie communicating to you that she is not going to make it.
There's a really great cut from Max shifting gears in the People Eater's vehicle to Furiosa pulling out the knife. And we haven't talked at all about Margaret Sixel, who's the editor. Also George Miller's wife.
Yes.
This is not only her first action film that she has ever edited, it is the first feature that she has edited that had characters who were humans and not animals. She did Babe, Pig in the City and Happy Feet, but this, and it's just like, so one of the greatest action films of all time is edited by someone who's never cut an action film before or really spent a lot of times cutting human beings. That's amazing. Max pulls forward. The people eater wakes up, tries to shoot Max, and he grabs him and uses him as a human shield against Joe, who's firing at him. There's flamethrowers everywhere. Max's vehicle's on fire. The two rigs are running parallel.
She's hurt real bad!
And again, there's that eye contact and that silent communication between Max and Furiosa.
Yeah.
And his rig is on fire. So naturally, as you mentioned before, Brendan, he needs something to keep the foot on the gas. So he grabs the giant, disgusting foot of the now dead people eater, rams it down on the gas pedal, climbs out, jumps to the other rig. And again, I go, oh, good, safe. He's back on the other rig. It's the second he's there and a dude swings down on a polecat and grabs him and they swing back. And I like they're almost dragging Max on the ground. And he gets this guy off, which lightens the load. And so the polecat swings back up as the People Eater's rig explodes. It's a ridiculous shot. And that is Tom Hardy on a polecat.
Wow.
Which he was nervous about. He did do it, but it was scary. I mean, it looks scary as fuck, honestly.
Yeah.
And there's even as there's this explosion, and this is a real explosion. It was a remote control tanker truck. It's blown in the desert. It's over 1,000 liters of fuel for this explosion. But composited into this shot, we see the Doof Warrior in his red, which perfectly matches the red of the explosion as we're driving. I mean, we're in a level of ridiculousness. I can't fathom it. It's so crazy what's going on now.
Him swinging past as explosions are happening behind him, I effing love that shot.
Oh, it's like the trailer shot to end all trailer shots.
Right.
Like that is the one they put in the trailer, and it was like, how am I not going to go see that movie?
Yeah. Oh, it's cool that you walk away from explosion in slow motion. How about this? How about polecatting with an explosion right behind you? And I do like that earlier in that sequence you just described, Steve, we have a little bit of a Road Warrior reference when we see the camera close up on Furiosa as her truck hits that car and explodes it just the end of Road Warrior. So a little bit of a wink to those of us who are fans of the Mad Max series from George. So yeah, good stuff here. And I like that the whole chase just keeps you on your feet. As you said, Steve, like just when you think there's maybe a moment where they're all going to come together, something else pops up, something else shows up to keep adding the stakes and keep adding to the difficulties of getting out of the situation, which makes the film all the more incredible and better, in my opinion.
So as Joe is pulling up on Furiosa, who rams into him, Max has ended up on the drum truck and is climbing around on that. And Furiosa turns to Nux, looking really the worse for wear at this point, and says,
I'm gonna need you to drive.
I'll get him out of our way.
And again, she uses that foot measuring tool to lock the gas down, climbs out, obviously in pain.
Yeah.
Max is now behind the Doof Warrior and jumps onto the bungees to avoid getting shot. I mean, they're swinging around on these bungees, firing flames out of the guitar. Like, it's such a level of insanity that's happening at this point.
The fight he has with the Doof Warrior's guitar, as you said, Steve, like knocking people off left and right, I thought that was awesome, seeing the flames shoot out. And then when he rips off the mask off the Doof Warrior, you see that this is a dude who is maybe one of these war boys that has maybe lived a little longer than he should have, because he's blinded. His entire face is white, and he has these jaws that are almost like some kind of predator, so to speak. And so it adds even more menace to see that he's this wild animal. He's not just a guy who's like playing the guitar and he's into it. He's actually this wild animal who's caught up in all of it. And the red and the white is so stark. I think it's just an awesome scene that adds even more drama and tension and danger to the film in that sequence, seeing the Doof Warrior become a menace when we thought he was just a ridiculous guy playing a guitar that shot flames, you know?
Max runs and jumps onto the back of the war rig with guys coming up after him. And then Cheeto, who, when we started this episode, had tried to defect essentially back to Joe, runs out on the hood of the car and calls after Rictus and says, "Take me." And you go, oh my God, she's running like right at this moment.
Yeah.
And Rictus jumps under the hood, grabs Cheeto, and takes her back to Joe's car. And then Rictus goes to grab Dag, who tries to fight him, and the Vuvalini come to help. And he's just, look, Rictus is a big guy. So they are not doing very well against him. And then Cheeto goes to help Furiosa get onto Joe's car. Was the whole reason Cheeto was defecting actually to help Furiosa fight Joe, or was she really defecting?
Oh, in this moment, yes. Like, it's the misdirect, right? It's that she's full. They're all fully on board in this effort at this point, and she's essentially saves the day, saves the movie by this move, because otherwise Furiosa doesn't get to Joe. And you only as a viewer have this doubt in your mind because of what happened earlier. But I think, once these women, the wives, meet the Vuvalini and they all hatch this plan together, they're all 100% on board.
Yeah. It's a nice misdirect for us as the audience, but they're totally in.
Yeah.
I totally agree. And it's a redemption for Cheeto.
Yes.
It's so, again, these characters with very little time or exposition or backstory have these arcs that are that really work. Max is not doing well against Rictus. He's a bit out of his league here. He's getting the shit kicked out of him. And then Furiosa's going toe-to-toe with a war boy. And initially in the choreography, he was supposed to headbutt her. But then Charlize said, hey, could I headbutt him instead? And George was like, absolutely. And so that's how that ended up that way. And she gets kind of knocked off the side of Joe's car. She's hanging by the side. Rictus is just beating the hell out of Max when one of the Vuvalini shoot him in one of those canisters in the back, which Max is able to grab and then gives Rictus the full beatdown. Subject of a recent Cine-Files short on patreon.com/the-Cine-Files is best movie beatdowns. So you can check that out. Joe is totally focused on Toast, who he has hit and drawing blood, when Furiosa reaches up with that metal hand and grabs him, essentially by the face, and says,
remember me?
And this moment is so shocking. It's one of those moments that obviously was shocking the first time I see it. I've rewatched it like 15 times in preparation for this episode to try to understand exactly what happens. It's shocking every time I see it.
Yeah.
Which is that her arm and the chain that's sort of on her gets pulled down into the wheel, and it just rips Joe's face off in just this absolutely bloody mess. It happens super fast.
Oh, but if you don't think I've freeze-framed it, you've got another thing coming.
Max pulls her up. Toast is now driving Joe's car. She spits on Joe, which I love. I think that's a great little detail. Dag comes out, grabs the bag of seeds. Will she now be the keeper of the seeds?
Yeah, 100%. That's what was being passed on. Yeah.
Yep, I totally agree.
She dies with a smile on her face, too. Like she's lived a good life and got to kill one more person with a shot to the head.
And pass on the seeds.
And
like both,
right.
The two elements of her personality, the person who kills people on sight and is the keeper of the seeds, are both, satisfied.
Yep.
The final moment of the keeper, I think I've cried with her every time seeing that last shot of her, by the way.
With the smile on her face?
Yeah. It really gets me. And then we have a moment with Capable and Nux. And because he's still driving the war rig, they're all moving over to Joe's car. And he says,
when you're across safe, I'll jam the throttle and follow you.
So Nux is going to stay with them. That's the plan.
I don't think that's Nux's plan, but yeah.
Oh, I think he would have, had things not gone exactly the way they went, he would have.
Oh, you do? Oh,
yeah.
I think he knew it was a suicide mission and sent her on just to.
That's possible.
Yeah.
So Capable goes, and they're all hurrying. We're almost at the pass. We see Rictus waking up. The tension build, the way the music is playing, the level of the sound design is just really powerful as we're coming to this last moment. Rictus climbs up and is about to grab him when Nux slams on the brake. Then he hits the gas coming forward. Rictus does the full Hulk move and rips the engine essentially out of the war rig. Flames are everywhere. This moment is so perfect. Yeah. Nux makes eye contact with Capable. He points and he mouths the words, and the camera comes back under Joe's monster truck to the war rig where Nux spins the wheel And this is, by the way, a huge practical stunt. They really crashed this war rig. And when they did it, there was a mannequin in the war rig to be for Nux. And there was also the driver, which again is Guy Norris, the stunt coordinator, who's actually driving this. And George Miller is on the monitor watching, and he sees this body get totally destroyed. And he thought it was Guy Norris.
Oh my God.
He thought he had just killed his stuntman, who had already broken his leg on Road Warrior. And he runs out. And of course, everything was totally fine. But this is a crazy, crazy stunt. The rig flips over, crashes, sliding forward towards the pass. The speaker truck crashes into the war rig. The guitar goes into the foreground, but it's still on this bungee. So it goes back as explosions are everywhere. And the steering wheel goes into camera and we go to black. I mean, the shot is awesome. Yeah. So we've been talking about this movie for a while. And now we have to talk about a little bit behind the scenes again. Okay. Because Warner Brothers was not pleased.
With the movie?
At all. Wow. They are getting more and more stressed out. The movie's going over budget. It's taking a long time to shoot. And this is how things work when you're working on a Hollywood movie, is you shoot and there you make, what you shot that day is called dailies. And the dailies are going to go back to the studio. And the studio is always going to review dailies. And they're going to, because they want to make sure that you're making the movie that you said they're going to make, that it looks good, that, they want to be able to watch. Well, the problem is there are no masters. So these are all just little shots of Furiosa turning to the right, someone jumping over here, a look, a hand gesture, and they're all out of order. They're not cut together. So they're looking at these shots and they don't know what the fuck they're looking at. Because when you have a master, you're like, oh, well, that's the scene. Here's the close-ups and the other shots that fill up the scene. I can understand this to some degree. Yeah. They don't understand anything. They just think it's a mess. They're like, this is terrible. And there's also a power struggle going on at Warner. Someone else, they're trying to oust the chair of the board. And some of the executives, other people are trying to take over. They've got other films going on at the same time that are going over budget, including Man of Steel. Wow. And so the studio's having all sorts of trouble. And so the studio head is going, I have to prove to my board that I am a tough guy and am in control. And this thing going on in Namibia looks totally out of control. So in September, he flies to Namibia and he goes around and he says, let's shut everything down. Shut everything down for 4 days. I want to talk to George. I want to figure out what's going on. A bunch of kind of second unit crews, they didn't shut down. They just snuck the war rig over to the other side of a dune and kept shooting privately by themselves, hiding whenever the studio executive came by, which I think is hilarious. And some of those shots are actually in the movie. And basically he says, you know what? You were supposed to have 2 more months to make this film. They haven't shot any of the Citadel stuff. They've just been shooting the chase from the Citadel. They were going to shoot the Citadel all at the end, some of it on stages in Cape Town in South Africa. And the studio had said, you know what? You got 2 weeks to finish the movie. That's it. Yeah. Cut them off in 2 weeks, shut everything down. And they're like right in the middle of stuff. And by the way, so some of the sets were still standing and they're like, well, we're just going to have to tear down these sets. And they're like, no, we're going to need these sets if we ever shoot the other stuff we're trying to shoot. And so Colin Gibson, who's the production designer, he literally pulls out his own credit card to pay to store the sets so they don't tear them down in case they ever get to go shoot again. And so now this crew that's been for months living together, making this insane thing in the desert, they say, okay, fly to Cape Town where we'll shoot a couple of things on stages. And so they decide to get one plane for the whole crew, like 350 people who have all like sweaty and gross and disgusting and dirty, get onto this plane together. And when it takes off, the pilot gets on the radio, on the PA and says, the war rig has taken off. And everyone in the plane just goes nuts cheering. And they say, I mean, it was amazing to be in civilization. Like suddenly there was air conditioning and there was different kinds of food and there was like movies and you slept in a nice bed and all of those things. But it was also really, really sad because they're just desperately trying to come up with what the hell do we shoot in these last 2 weeks that's going to make this movie that now has no beginning and no end work, you know?
Yeah.
They get back to Hollywood and now George is contractually obligated to present a rough cut for a movie that has no beginning and no end. And they don't have any time. There's no special effects. They haven't had time to clean things up or figure things out, but they had to do the screening. And it sounds like it was absolutely a disaster. They're just like, this movie's terrible. It makes no sense. And George is like, of course it makes no sense. You stopped me before I shot the beginning and the end, and we don't have all, and in general, and I'm sure, Brendan, you've experienced this too, don't show things too early to people who don't understand how to watch a thing that's not finished yet, because people won't get it, Eventually, they finally did convince the studio to give them enough money to go back, I think in Australia now, to shoot the Citadel sequences and to shoot the opening and the ending.
Thank God.
So now we're heading back to the Citadel. One of the Vuvalini is driving. We hear groaning, and we see Furiosa laid out in the back, looking gray and sick and just moments away from death.
Why is she making that noise?
She's pumping air into her chest cavity. She's collapsing her lungs, one breath at a time.
Max pulls out a knife, and I love that he says,
I am so sorry,
before he drives the knife into her side, and we hear Furiosa take a breath.
Yeah.
And he lifts her. It's so tender. Like, it's so lovely as he's holding her. And he whispers something to her, and what we hear is that she's lost all her blood, And again, I never thought the blood bag was going to come back. It's such an amazing plant because you're like, we just never expect it. But then as soon as he grabs this needle, we're like, oh, he's the blood bag.
Mm-hmm.
And he whispers something to her. He puts the needle in himself. We see it flowing through the IV into her arm, and he grabs her face. Oh, Tom Hardy is so good in this scene. It's not quite Ed Harris in The Abyss, because nothing is like that scene. But it's still so tender and so lovely as he holds her and says,
Max. My name is Max. That's my name.
Yeah, I think this is his redemption.
Yeah.
Right? What we said, like Brendan asked earlier, like, what is he carrying around? It's this, that he couldn't save his wife. Right? And so in this moment, who I'm sure he saw as his equal, here is someone who he is saving as his equal. And tenderly and with care. Remember, he's been seeing all these visions, so God knows what he sees here or what he's mixing up in his mind here, but he's certainly showing affection for her, and giving her his name, the vulnerability of it all, which I think is super powerful.
Well, I said something in the first episode about how I saw this movie as romantic. And, I saw it as also following some, what we would associate with romantic comedy structure. And we talked about that a little bit. But here is the specific point in which I think it departs. And it's why I find it more romantic than I would find a romantic comedy, right? Like, I think I don't have any problem with the genre of romantic comedy. I think there are great ones in the form, but they're a fantasy for a reason, and it's because they're always leaving out the most important part about romance, right? The important part is that it's fleeting, that it's a thing you build up to this moment of romance, not that you end on it. It's that the moment was there and you hold on to it forever, right? The more romantic stories that we know throughout history are the ones where the romance maybe happened in the past or happened at the beginning and is the thing you're trying to return to. And the absence of it is what creates the greatness of it, the kind of deep, long-lasting remembrance of this romance. And love doesn't necessarily do that. You could have a loving relationship that's not filled with romance the whole time. We understand that. We understand that as people. But what makes love endure is the romance. And I always feel like my favorite romances, the ones that are depicted, are ones where that moment meant everything. And I try to think about, like, what are some of those things, popular movies that I could think of? The movie Once, the movie Lost in Translation, On the Waterfront, even the Pixar film Up. I think that's one of the best ones because this is a love-filled life of two elderly people. And the man needs communication from beyond the grave to be reminded what their romance was really about, so that he can live going forward. And that brings me to this moment in this film where everything we've seen these two go through is to bond them to each other. And we saw it from the very beginning Not unlike romantic comedies where two people meet and they know there's a connection there, and then you're just drawing it out and waiting until that connection is a flame, right? Here we're waiting for that, but we're not waiting for it to, result in a big kiss or in, the carrying across the threshold or whatever, although that does kind of happen. But here we go to the core of what the Mad Max movies have been about from the start, or have not been about. A central aspect of them is giving life through these resources. And in other movies in the series, it's oil or it's water or it's physical goods. But the most important one is still our blood, right? That's who we are. And this is the movie. He gives this to her, heart to heart, right? This is their connection. And we have not seen, he at the beginning of this movie, he's having this blood taken from him against his will. This is his choice to give. And it's the biggest expression of a kind of romantic bond that he has left. Scratch that. He has one more left, which you said, John. He gives up his name, which he has withheld through the whole film. And there's just something about this that, to me, it's all spoken entirely under the surface. You don't have to turn this movie on and think, I'm watching this great romance of Mad Max. You're watching one of the great action movies of all time. But for this to be there for after 24 times that I've watched this film, and I can still feel it very deeply, get me very emotional, have me feel very full of life and hope and kind of a coexistence with people from seeing this moment. This is, to me, the most powerful moment in the movie.
That's a great point. And the great action movies have that at their core, don't they? Right? Like Die Hard is all about him trying to figure out the relationship with his wife and the romance and all of that, and having that scene in the bathroom with blood dripping from his feet, talking about how the regrets he has. Those are incredible to add on to the great action movies, to have that romance. I know people are going to hate Armageddon, but there is something really poetic in that as well, in the connection, not romance necessarily, but the love connection between Bruce Willis and Liv Tyler. And all of the great ones have that at their core.
There's
and
love in Terminator 2. It's this love of this child
right.
and his friend.
Yeah, his friend, right? Exactly. And what you said, Steve, earlier in Abyss, like Ed Harris and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, having that element to it is what separates that from the regular ones. No offense to, the Van Damme films and the Seagal films and all that kind of stuff, but like love is so important to elevate action films into a whole nother level. And the love doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. It can be any kind of love. And I think that's what's great. So I'd never thought of it that way, man. And so you kind of opened my mind about that, Brendan. So great stuff, man. Great stuff.
It's funny too, because it's like, if you walk out of this movie and you thought of none of these things, and you didn't, and you would just be like, that was a crazy, amazing action movie, top to bottom, totally satisfied, 100%. But what's amazing to me, and listening to both of your points and thinking about it, is like, it's thematically stacked so deeply, because we have a story where it's about life and death, the cult of death, which is the war boys, and we have we're striving for life, which is the wives escaping. We have the seeds and the killer and the keeper of the seeds. We have Max, who is removing himself from society, and the more he removes himself, the more insane he becomes, and that it is through. And then we have mother's milk and blood, both liquids that bring life, that are symbolic throughout this movie. And we have, as you said, Brendan, blood being taken away from him. And my guess is, when they came up with that idea, it was just an idea initially, it was how you're going to reveal Mel Gibson. It was a fun idea at the beginning. My guess is they didn't have the idea of the transfusion for Furiosa until later, because that's you don't have all your ideas at once. But the fact that you're able to go full circle, and the name and all of those things, it's thematically stacked super deep. Yeah. So beneath all this action, if you want to dig into this, it's all fucking there.
I think this is one of the true lasting imprints of the writer Nicola Thoris, who wrote on this film with George Miller, and in the telling of this, the making of this movie, they talk about how, we've said it over and over again, that they had about 80% of this movie good to go from back in the 90s, even when they were first doing story sessions. But it was the dramaturgy that Nico was able to dig out of here to really, really wrestle with the themes and work them over, knead them like dough until you got at what you're getting at, Steve, which is that there are many layers here. And as you can bring them to the surface throughout this movie, that's what's going to make it successful.
Yeah.
So we're driving back into the Citadel, and we see the people on the ground, including some guy with no legs crawling out of a hole as Joe's car pulls in, and we see those giant machines being lowered with the war boys on hamster wheels or whatever. And by the way, I feel like the Citadel is sort of transformed in my mind coming back because I know so much more about the culture and everything than I knew when we left it the first time. And the truck stops, and we see that on the hood is this shrouded body of the Immortan Joe.
Reveal yourself!
And Max comes out. It's a low angle past him to the platform. Everybody is watching him, and he pulls back that sheet, revealing the Immortan Joe. And there's a huge reaction. At this moment, I don't know if they're all going to kill him. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Yeah.
It's a ballsy move, man.
Yeah. And he throws the body on the ground, and just the horde of people who crawl over Joe, just ripping off all his stuff. It seems as if they don't have a lot of reverence for this guy now that he's gone.
Let it be known that when you try to put people underfoot, when you finally are taken out of power, the people will rip you to pieces, just like they did to Mussolini, just like they did to other dictators when they got their hands on them. So, it's a good lesson.
Max helps Furiosa out. She can barely stand.
Yeah.
And the reaction, you realize, which we got a sense of this before, but how important Furiosa is and the feelings towards Furiosa throughout this group, because they start cheering. And the big question is, what is Corpus Colossus, who's Joe's other son, and what are the people that are up in the Citadel going to do? And they're yelling to lower the platform, which they finally do. We drive onto the platform. And we see the water is opened up by the mothers who had been pumped for their, breastfeeding. The camera pushes in on Max. He's on the platform next to Furiosa. Water's pouring everywhere. We go back to Furiosa, and she turns around, and Max is now gone.
Yeah.
She looks down. We see one eye is swollen shut, and she looks into the crowd, and there's just a wonderful shot with Max and all the rest of the crowd mostly out of focus as they look at each other. And there's a pause and just a nod. And then he disappears into the crowd as she rises up, finally obscured by the platform. What do you think of this moment where Max chooses not to go up with Furiosa?
For Max, it's an extension of what I was talking about before. He's already given everything he can, and there's no more that he has to express. He's done everything. And I think for the movie's behalf, it's the expression that we now are having revealed to us, the hero of the film. It's her. This is for her to be exalted here. And Max has been a dutiful soldier in that journey, but the journey the whole time has been hers, which was something when they were making the movie, they were wrestling with the whole time, that this is Furiosa's story. It's not really Max's. And to me, this is the indication that it was a success, that they figured out the way to have both heroes exist without detracting from one another. And this makes sense and hits emotionally when it finally happens.
Yeah, I love it because this is just like The Man with No Name. This is just like some of those Bruce Lee movies, right? I mean, he is the reluctant hero, always brought into this thing, but the story is always bigger than him or them. And I love that he somehow finds a way off that platform and then fades into the crowd with one last head nod between the both of them, because that was kind of their language throughout the movie, was the head nods at times, or the looks at each other of like, I can read your mind without even you saying anything about what you're going to do. And I will do what I need to do in concert with that. So for him to just kind of slide off and let her have her moment, because she is now going to essentially rule the Citadel now. She doesn't need him anymore, and he doesn't need to be there anymore. That's not his place. And he knows it. which is why he takes for lack of a better term, his agency to slide on out of there with his Irish goodbye and fade into the crowd and go and find his next adventure or next place to be. Max will never get peace because I don't think he'll ever come to terms with the loss of his wife and his child because it's the one thing he can never make right. And I think he's a guy who's driven by that and will eventually, die somewhere in some fight somehow, never having resolved that, never having found peace. And that keeps him heroic in my mind. That keeps him such an interesting figure and very Western-like in its approach to Max, which I love about the series.
You know how you can tell that a moment really works is that you find yourself having the same emotions no matter how many times you see it, which is like every time I want him to stay up there.
Do
I
you
want
really?
him to go, oh yeah, every
wow.
time.
Okay.
And every time I know that it's right that he doesn't, and I have that feeling, the same feeling. I think it is absolutely a brilliant choice. The studio disagreed.
Of course.
They wanted a happy ending where Max joins Furiosa, and they forced George Miller to shoot it. George Miller fought them, and finally he's like, okay, I will go shoot this. He set it up. He shot one take. No coverage. And that's it. So here you go.
Here you go, you bastards. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we're in post. John, as I think you mentioned in one of our other episodes, it took 3 months just to watch all the footage.
Yeah,
there's so much footage
for the editor or his wife to edit all the footage. Yeah,
this is one of the things about editing that people don't get is like when the first shark documentary I cut, they handed me 240 hours of footage. It took me months just to watch it all, just to get, and then I had to figure out what an hour show was out of that. There are in this movie 2,700 cuts.
Wow.
That is in 120 minutes. That's averages 22.5 cuts a minute. Wow. That is more than one cut every 3 seconds. That is crazy.
Yeah.
Almost nothing is shot at 24 frames a second. Almost everything is sped up or slowed down. There are 2,000 visual effects shots. They had more early screenings. They all are going badly. All the screenings are going badly. George has final cut of this film in his contract, but he also they have to do test screens.
Yeah.
George hates test screenings, particularly for a movie like this, because he really doesn't think people can imagine what's not there, Yeah. And the other thing is what he was contracted to deliver was a PG-13 film. And what's interesting about this movie is there's very little blood. There's no nudity. There's no swearing. It gets an R just for being really, really intense.
Yeah.
The studio said, we would really like this movie to be 100 minutes long. So, a lot shorter. So 20 minutes shorter than what they have. George and Margaret, the editor, said that's not possible. And so the studio did what studios did, which is they bring in another editing team that's editing parallel to George to try to create a 100-minute version of this movie. George is obviously 100% against this, hates this whole idea. And now they said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to set up, you have to do screenings. You can't say no to the screenings because that's in the contract. We're going to set up 2 parallel screenings. And we're going to have one screening that is screening the 100-minute version that we want. And we can have your version that's 2 hours long screening somewhere else.
Yeah.
Again, George is totally against this whole idea, doesn't have a choice. They do the 2 screenings. There is no comparison. Hands down, the long one wins, and the R-rated one wins. And finally, they agree to let the 2-hour R-rated version of Mad Max Fury Road come out. The critics loved it. It's a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. It got a huge standing ovation at Cannes, which I always take with a grain of salt because they stand for a lot of weird stuff at Cannes. Tom Hardy did, as you mentioned before, John, publicly apologize to George after seeing the film. It grossed $380 million, which is not a ginormous hit. It is a successful film. It was nominated for Best Picture, Director, Cinematography, and Visual Effects, all of which it lost. But it won for editing, design, costume design, makeup and hair, sound mixing. It won more Oscars that year than any other movie. Although it didn't win Best Picture, it lost cinematography to The Revenant. It lost directing also to The Revenant. And it lost visual effects to Ex Machina, and Best Picture that year was Spotlight, which is a totally good movie.
Oh my God, Mad Max is such a better film.
But Mad Max, I'm not going to be. Spotlight's good. It's a good
Spotlight
film.
good.
Well acted. It's about a serious, important topic.
Yes.
It's nothing like Mad Max.
Saw it when it was called All the Presidents. Yeah,
So I believe we're in the place where we need to give our final thoughts on this film. I'm just going to go first because I honestly, I feel like I've said everything I had to say. I'll go back to that idea of 10,000 or 100,000 ideas. And to me, it's like there's just an overwhelming amount of creativity that goes into this movie. Yes, George Miller obviously is the visionary in charge, but what I love about the way he made this movie and why it is in so many ways an experimental film is all the freedom between Eve Ensler working with the wives, to the guys from Cirque du Soleil on the polecats, to the car guys who are designing the cars, to the war boys who are coming up with gestures, to the Immortan Joe who's bringing his everything he has as an actor off the set, to the world that they created. Like the way that this is edited, this is just it's always more. What's more great ideas that we can put into a thing? And I'm kind of with, I remember which one of you brought up the Steven Soderbergh who says, I don't know how you could have made this movie, but that's where I am. I was like, seems entirely impossible. And John has heard me mention this before, but I have this category we've talked about in the Cine-Files, which I call great movies that have ruined Hollywood, which are the movies like Jaws and Die Hard that were so successful. And then everybody tries to imitate them and make a whole bunch of crappy movies. This does not go in that category because nobody has ever tried to imitate this except George Miller himself. It is not imitatable. It is Mad Max Fury Road, and there will never, ever be anything like it.
Yeah, I basically have the same final conclusion in I don't know if you call this one word or two words, two Latin words, sui generis. That was what I wrote down, and that it has no equals. It is completely unique. It will not be replicated. It was not even replicated by George Miller, who wisely knew he couldn't replicate it. And Furiosa is a much different film than this. Yeah. But I couldn't help but thinking while I watched this and then considered it with the other 4 films in the series, watched them all together in the course of a week, is how not only does this fit within everything that the other 4 movies are, it improves all 4 movies. Like, that's another great part of its legacy, is that, especially that a lot of people came to this. It's obviously the most widely seen one of the 5 movies. And so a lot of people then went to the other Mad Max movies after seeing this, and you would think they would feel lesser. And, by all accounts, they are, they in terms of what we're talking about here. They're lesser films, but they are of a piece with this one. And it's because of the auteurship of Miller and because of his collaborative efforts with everyone he surrounds himself with. And again, we go back to every time we've talked about this movie mentioning the book, Blood, Sweat, and Chrome. And I don't see how you could watch this movie and then read that book or listen to that book and not be just blown away by the fact that it exists. It should not exist, and it does. And that's probably its greatest testament. It's just like, by sheer force of will, this thing became a masterpiece. We've talked about it many times, saying it's one of the greatest action movies ever made, and it is, but I also do think it's one of the great movies ever made, and that's not a list that has, more than 2 digits on it.
Agreed.
Wow. I would say this is one of those films that's in a franchise that rivals its origin, right? Creed rivals Rocky. And I would say this belongs in that mix as well. I think Rogue One rivals Empire Strikes Back. I think there are just films that come along that the right mixture comes into play, and it reminds you why this franchise has endured as long as it has and why people were so incredibly excited to go back to it. And I think this is a marvelous film that, as you guys have said, will never be imitated effectively. And it is in a way, because you guys have covered, I think, just about everything you can say about the film. But I think in a way, it is even meta in a way, because it is a film that if it works for you and you find your common tribe of people who love this movie, you can go and talk about this movie and break it down and analyze it and share it, kind of like a lost historical document. It almost is a part of the universe that it itself is profiling in the movie. this movie. And I think that speaks volumes about the artistry and the effort put in by everybody to create this film. It is wholly original. It absolutely deserved Best Picture. That I will say that to my dying day. And anybody who dismisses it as a car chase has no idea what they're talking about. A 2-hour car chase about this film, because there is so much more going on with the emotion, the relationships, the story being told, the commentary it's making about willful surrender versus forced surrender. The blood bag, as we talked about at the end, being a really good example of that. There's commentary that's making throughout about how to raise a civilization to be a successful civilization, and raising a civilization to be in service of one person's ego. And so there's so much going on in the movie, along with incredible cinematography, incredible direction, and a pace here that completely works throughout, with really great actors, both well-known and only maybe known in Australia, that deliver so many levels and complexity to the roles they bring together. And it leads to a very satisfying end that honors its entire storyline and creation by the end of the movie. So yeah, it endures. And you, as Steve said, you will still feel the same emotions all these years later, because it's a great movie that works. You know what's coming, and it still gets you. Those are the great ones. Those are the great ones.
So that's what we think of Mad Max Fury Road. Of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can visit us on our Facebook page. Just do a search for the Cine-Files. It's Cine_Files on Twitter, Cine-Files Podcast on Instagram. You can subscribe to the show at all the usual subscribey places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify or YouTube. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't done it already. Comments on Spotify are really fun. What's nice there is that more and more people are getting into discussions about these films on Spotify. It's a great place to do it. Same thing on YouTube. You can buy or stream Mad Max Fury Road along with every other movie we've ever reviewed at cinephiles.net. And you can reach me at SR Morris on Twitter, SR Morris1 on Instagram. John, how about you?
You can always reach me at The Rocha Says on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And my YouTube channel, youtube.com/John Rocha Says, where I do all my reviews, reactions, and have a bunch of shows there, like the Hot Mic Geek Buddies and the Jedi Way, and also my podcasts feeds, other than this one, the Hot Mic and the Geek Buddies. They're there for you all to subscribe to as well.
And as I said many times, I am a longtime listener and subscriber to the Full Maron and the WTF Marc Maron podcast. And I was just looking through some of my favorites, the ones you have recently, if people haven't gone to the show. You had Al Pacino, the Josh Brolin one was awesome. The Bill Burr one was awesome. I love hearing Michael Rooker and Ed O'Neill on it. And man, that Malcolm McDowell interview is one of my favorites you guys have had a long time.
Oh, that's great.
The show continues to be awesome. So Brendan, thank you for all your good work on that. And thank you so much for coming on the show to talk Fury Road with us.
Thank you, guys. This has been a total honor. I mean that. It's like I felt absolutely honored to be asked to talk about this movie. Like really, truly.
I feel very confident that we made the right choice on that one.
I think whatever we did that we normally do, I think you added so much more to what we normally do that I think a lot of our listeners, probably all of our listeners, are going to very much
appreciate that so much.
And me personally, It was great to go down this path with you, brother.
So I think that is it for this week. We will be back next time with an all-new film right here on the Cine-Files.